Let's talk about why the good men get filtered out early on dating apps. A lot of men assume that if they're not getting matches, or if they get very few matches, or if they get filtered out very early, it must mean they're unattractive. Surely that must be the case. Or maybe they're low value, or they're just doing something fundamentally wrong. Well, that might be the case here and there, but it probably isn't. And the internet loves to reinforce that idea. You'll hear things like women only want to top guys, or if you're not getting matches, you're just not good enough. While that might be the case once again here and there, sure, but that explanation is way too simple, and in most cases, like I said, it's wrong, probably. A lot of men who get filtered out early on dating apps are not bad decisions or bad options at all. They're stable, decent, emotionally available, and they're capable of relationships. So, overall, just good guys, good dudes. The problem is that dating apps are very bad at surfacing those qualities, especially early on. So, I want to explain why the good men get filtered out early, and that might be, well, frustrating. And it's not because they're lacking, it's not because, they're not good enough, but it's just because of how the system works. Dating apps filter on speed, they don't filter on substance. Dating apps are built for fast decisions, seconds, not even minutes. They're made for instinct and not evaluation. Early filtering isn't about would this guy be a good partner? Would this man make a good partner? It's about does this man trigger immediate interest right now? So, qualities like steadiness and reliability, emotional maturity, and long term orientation, they don't register well at that stage. They take time to feel. They don't jump off a screen. So, men who are calm and measured and grounded, they often lose early comparisons to men who, well, project excitement and, maybe a little bit of edge. Even if those traits don't translate well into, well, good relationships later on. That doesn't mean that women are shallow, not at all. It means the filtering mechanism is shallow by design. Early filtering selects for what is loud, what is visible, not necessarily for what lasts. And many good men unintentionally signal long-term energy, while that isn't, well, wrong per se, of course not. They come across as serious, thoughtful, stable, and responsible, and they look like someone, you would build something with, which is something that a lot of us guys would like to do, build something with a woman. But here's the problem: dating apps are optimized for short term engagement, and hopefully we get some long term engagement, unless you're in it for the short term, of course. And at the early swiping stage, later, quote unquote, later, loses the quote unquote now. Someone who looks fun or unpredictable or, low commitment really often feels, it's strange, but it often feels a little bit safer to swipe yes on than someone who feels like a decision waiting to happen. And that is exactly what women do. So, good men don't get rejected because they're undesirable. Not at all. They get postponed. And postponed usually means filtered out. Apps don't have a save for later option for men. It means that women just move on. And here's another one that is, well, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but it is important. When a woman swipes on dating apps, she's not evaluating men in isolation. She's comparing them against whoever else is visible in that moment. And, well, yeah, then you might lose here and there. And dating apps tend to surface men who are optimized for novelty, men who are visually striking, or socially flashy, or look less constrained. And good men often live more structured lives. They have routines, they have predictable schedules, there is less chaos, less spectacle. Those are definitely advantages in a real relationship. Absolutely. But they are a disadvantage in early side by side comparisons. So a stable man gets filtered out not because he's worse, not at all, but because he's competing in a context that favors surface level differentiation over depth. And that's a system issue once again. It's not a personal failure. And another reason good men get filtered out early is that dating apps don't reward availability in the right way. Being emotionally available, consistent, and ready for something real, it doesn't help you early on. These are great qualities, absolutely, for sure. But because availability doesn't show up in a swipe, you're losing out. And meanwhile, men who are emotionally unavailable, casually browsing, or just passing time still look appealing on the surface. That's because the dating apps don't look below the surface. So men end up competing with other men who are not actually in the same phase of life. You gotta remember that. So a woman might choose the fantasy of someone unavailable over the reality of a man who is grounded. That decision feels good for short term and, well, it will be disappointing later on for sure. But that is also a thing that, is something women have to do in the right way, I would say. They have to filter appropriately. But if they do it wrong, then filtering has already happened and they can't go back to the good men, the available men, which are, well, you if you're listening. And another one is the calm energy that would read as low urgency, especially online. And this one is a little bit subtle, I think. In real life, calm and confidence, it's extremely attractive. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard women say this. Calm, sexy, confidence, sexy, knowing what you want, sexy. It creates safety, which is again sexy. It creates trust. Time to get sexy. You know what I'm saying? But online, calm energy often reads as low urgency. And urgency performs extremely well on the dating apps. People are more likely to swipe on profiles that feel emotionally charged, intense, or stimulating. So that's why you got to make sure that your profile pops a little bit. And even if that intensity fades quickly in real interaction, you're still losing out to those guys. So good men, they usually don't really push for urgency because that's not really who they are. And it shows on their profiles. There is, less pressure. And they don't escalate very fast. They don't chase the attention. All of that is extremely healthy, don't get me wrong. But in an environment that rewards immediacy and that does reward urgency, that healthiness can look like indifference, and indifference gets filtered out early, even though that might be exactly who you are, calm and grounded. But you gotta make sure that your profile is a little bit popping, to get that urgency going to have women swipe yes on you. So, what does this actually mean? Well, when you put all of this together, something important becomes clear once again. The good men don't get filtered out because they're bad options. No, sir. They get filtered out because dating apps are designed to filter before the qualities that make good partners. That is the problem we have as the good guys. You know, the apps are designed to filter before the qualities show that make good partners, before this all becomes visible. And dating apps are front loaded with attraction and back loaded with discernment, which means that if you're this stable, nice guy who has his shit together, you know, you'll lose out on, the front load. That's what it is. And real relationships are exactly the opposite. That backloaded stuff is important, but it doesn't show up on your dating profile. So if you're a man who does well in real life but struggles online, that doesn't mean you're failing. It often means the medium you're using doesn't showcase what you actually bring to the, quote unquote table. This isn't an argument that dating apps are evil. I'm not saying that. I'm also not saying that women are doing something wrong, even though, if you're a woman and, you don't get the matches you want, you might have to dig a little bit deeper in the profiles you're swiping on. And men, we got to make sure that the profiles we're showcasing are interesting and, like I said, popping and a little bit flashy to get some attraction and to get someone to stop swiping and have a look at your profile. And what it means is that it is just simply, an explanation of a mismatch. Dating apps are very good at finding excitement. They are. They are much worse at finding stability. That's why everybody thinks dating apps are terrible and that it doesn't work out for relationships. But that's what it is. They are good for excitement, but they are not good at finding stability. And if you're a man whose value shows up over time, you know, and not instantly, you're going to be filtered out early more often. Not because you're unworthy, but because the system is impatient. Dating apps are impatient. And understanding that doesn't magically fix your online dating problems, but it does stop you from drawing the wrong conclusions about who you are. And drawing the wrong conclusion, you know what that means? It's where bitterness starts. So, if you're a good man struggling on dating apps, the first thing to understand is this: early filtering is not a verdict of your worth, it's a reflection of what the system sees and not what it doesn't see. Dating apps don't select the best partners, absolutely not. They select the best profiles for fast decisions. That's something completely different. And once you understand that difference, you stop confusing early rejection with long term incompatibility. And you stop letting an app define your value. Don't let the apps define who you are. That's it for today. I hope it was helpful, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye bye.